Hello and salutations, my fellow philosophers. Welcome back to the Philos-Hippie Podcast, in which we explore the intersection of philosophy and spirituality so that we can live more holistic and meaningful secular lives. In today's mini pod of the series, I'm not going to be sharing any profound philosophy or sageful spirituality from deep thinkers. Rather, this episode is going to be much more laid back and just me reflecting on my own personal experiences with deconstruction. Because a common theme on this channel is how we can be spiritual but not religious, or spiritual and philosophical in my personal parlance, without throwing out the good things that religion can bring, while also distancing ourselves away from the dogma that religion has. But distancing myself away from the dogma of my initial faith was profoundly disorienting for me. And so whoever's listening to my deconstruction testimony, maybe it'll help them gain some stability as they're going through their own personal deconstruction. So if you don't want to listen to me ramble on about my own personal life experiences and want to learn some actual philosophy, this episode isn't for you, and there's plenty more episodes on the channel if you want to learn more about that. Because I won't be diving into the ideas and critiques that made me leave the Christian faith. But rather, today, I will just be sharing my own personal arc and radical turn from being a teenage Pharisee into an heretical hippie. So, to start this story off, I don't want to brag or anything, but when I was a teenager, I was one of the most devout Christians, specifically of the Southern Baptist tradition, in my small hometown of Kansas. I was literally what I called myself, and my pastor too, a teenage Pharisee. I even grew to know more about the Bible than the pastor's own children in my church, who had been going to private school education ever since they could walk. But even when I was a teenage Pharisee, I was always wearing my skeptical goggles on because I grew disillusioned with the faith of my upbringing, Catholicism. I was baptized Catholic as a baby and went to Mass nearly every Sunday for the first decade of my life or so. But every Sunday, I never actually focused on the priest's homily, but instead my energy was spent suffering from having to dress up for just an hour while simultaneously wrestling with not having to pass out from having to constantly kneel on the kneelers, and also just the overwhelmingly intense incense that was in the church. It made me want to pass out every time I went there, man. When I wasn't suffering from the mundanity and lifelessness of the Catholic ritual, I spent my time daydreaming I was Spider-Man climbing up the rock-studded walls that littered the church, or also just replaying movies in my head because I was so bored I couldn't think of anything else to do with my time there. Albeit to say, my time in the Catholic Church wasn't the most productive, because I never felt the warm, welcoming presence that the church is supposed to emulate when I was a Catholic. When I was a kid, if I could put it in a word, the Catholic Church just felt cold to me. I never felt Christ's love, but more so guilt for my hell-damning sins I committed as a mere child during confession. I was more concerned with not saying, "Oh my God," and profaning the Lord's name in vain, than I was about Christ's noble sacrifice for us. This is why that when I discovered the energizing world of Protestant evangelicalism, everything changed for me. As a teenager, I started going to the biggest non-denominational church in town, where it was literally every kid's paradise. There was free pizza, full-on rock concerts every Wednesday night for Bible study, and before we gathered, we had free time to just have fun. So there were dozens of Xboxes and Wiis, gyms for ping pong, basketball, dodgeball, and more. They reeled in all the teenagers in the area, hook, line, and sinker. I never went to church because of my love for Jesus, but simply because me and all my friends wanted to dick around and have fun every Wednesday night. But eventually, the church's tactics actually led me to becoming a born-again Christian. I went to church camp around this same time, which was honestly just a summer vacation for me, honestly. But by the end of the week, I accepted Jesus Christ into my heart as my Lord and Savior. From that moment on, I was truly devoted to Christ, and I spent the following summer doing nothing but reading and studying the Bible every single day. It's kind of funny looking back on it because I remember wanting to read the Bible initially, not to be inspired by the words of the gospel, but because my friend told me that there were dragons in the book of Revelation. And of course, as a teenage boy, this piqued my interest immediately. And so I started to read more of it, and I eventually got hooked by it. I eventually got hooked by the words of Jesus, And because of it, it provoked a life-changing transformation in me. For the next few years, my soul was on fire for God. I prayed and studied my Bible daily. I listened to YouTube sermons and sermon jams for fun. And I was super involved in my local church. So much so that it actually became a second home for me. I finally began to gain a greater sense of what Christianity was supposed to embody. It truly felt like I had a new family and my new fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. I was in a strong community that exemplified true fellowship for the first and only time in my life. And because of this, I wanted to generously share the fruits and blessings that God had graciously granted me. But in my mind, I realized that there were so many unbelievers that didn't understand the grace of God and His love. And so I began to dive deep into the world of apologetics, or apologia in the Greek, which was the systemized defense of the Christian faith. But looking back on it, like, why would an omnipresent, omnipotent God need us to defend Him? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me today, but back then it did. So I spent many days of my life watching YouTube debates between Christopher Hitchens and the new atheists like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins. Sometimes I would even watch clips of famous apologists with titles such as Christian Owns Atheist or I was an atheist until God showed me this. I don't know why, but my reaction from watching these videos was a bit of a mixed bag, honestly. I learned a lot about Christianity during this time, but it often seemed like people were just talking at each other instead of to each other with a listening heart and an open mind. This got me thinking that maybe Christians and atheists simply don't fully understand the other perspective. So while wearing my heart on my sleeve and with the utmost of intentions, I dived deep into the atheist world of skepticism and their heavy critiques of Christianity. I did all of this so that I could be better equipped to help unbelievers come to see the light of Jesus and experience His love that I felt. And oh my gosh, how wonderfully naive I was back then. Of course, this had the opposite effect on me than I had intended. My natural disposition towards skepticism and my fervent desire to seek the truth above all else led me to deeply resonate with many of the arguments laid out before me. Consequences be damned. And I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of exhilarating for me re-examining my beliefs like this. There was a kind of thrill secretly questioning all the beliefs and teachings my church inculcated in me. But after staring into the abyss for too long, it eventually began to stare right back at me. In one of my past journal entries, I wrote the following. For the past couple of months, I have been struggling severely with my belief in God. My brain has relentlessly been asking many questions that it can never find satisfying answers to. I don't understand why God would allow me to go through a time of extreme doubt and confusion in the first place. I understand that God tests people, but His test may result in me completely abandoning my religion and faith in Him. One of the most pressing questions of all is whether or not Adam and Eve had a belly button. All answers seem to point to no, but I have absolutely no idea why. All jokes aside, I've been experiencing this season of confusion for a couple months now. And in the process, I've seen a radical change in who I am. Somehow, I have been growing as a person like never before. Even though I am losing my faith in God and losing my sense of Christian morality in the process. Ever since I have been slipping away from the faith, I have gained a greater sense of who I am by becoming unashamedly unashamed of my true self and discovering what my passions are in the process without God. Ironically enough, losing faith in God has given me loads of faith. Not faith in a creator, but faith in myself. I've started to take much more control over my life by removing myself from the hands of an omnipotent being. This has made me realize that I don't need God to fix all my problems and to make my life better. The strength, willpower, and faith that I need to conquer problems in my life don't rest in Him, but in my own holy trinity. Me, myself, and I. End quote. This blasphemy and heresy I was now starting to believe deep down in my bones. And this gave me a newfound freedom that was just intoxicating for me. I began to conduct an experimental approach to my personal experiences, very much in line with the Buddha or Ralph Waldo Emerson, where instead of placing all my faith in God, I placed it in myself and began to live in the way that I deemed fit. But during all this time, I was still going to church as if nothing was going on under the surface. I was going through a dark night of the soul underneath, while at the same time giving sermons and leading Bible studies or youth group events. During my last times regularly going to church, I tried to simply stop thinking about my changing beliefs, to just block it out of my mind, so that I can focus solely on God's purpose for my life, which was serving the community I love. In one last desperate attempt, I tried to be a devout Christian again and stopped backsliding in order to reignite my faith and love for God. But deep down, I simply couldn't take that leap of bad faith, in Sartre's words. I had witnessed the truth, and I could never go back being the same without compromising my identity, my authenticity in the process. And my split from the church was amplified by the summer of Rona in 2020. I simply couldn't go to church because we were all social distancing, and so it made it relatively easy for me to distance myself from the church at the time, which was honestly perfect timing. Along with social distancing, I began to realize that my church began to get much more politicized, and maybe it always was, but I just never realized it before. I just never realized it until all of a sudden they became adamantly anti-mask and super pro-MAGA, and their true colors began to shine for me. Like any hero's journey, I had a call of adventure to craft a more expansive worldview. But out of fear and uncertainty, I had refused the call. Christians often have the misconception that when someone strays from the faith, they do so because they are tired of living modest and pure lives, and they yearn to dive into decadence and decay. And that couldn't be further from the case. It is deeply ironic because in my personal experience, the type of Christians who are the most devout and passionate for God are the ones who typically begin to question their faith and beliefs first. This is because they are often the first ones who realize that the modern church today does not uphold its supposed values of radical love and compassion for all of God's creation. And so, people who deconstruct therefore become quickly disillusioned with Christianity as a whole, and they just cannot continue to associate themselves with the church because of this. And it's not like people who leave the church and deconstruct want to. Because what do you get out of it? You lose your community, your sense of identity, and you lose your meaning and overall purpose in life. But at the end of the day, it's all worth it if it means that we get to live in closer harmony with truth with a capital T. And so, I left. Not with some mic drop or flipping off God in the heavens. I quietly took that leap of faith into the abyss, into the void. And for a while, it felt like free fall. Because when you deconstruct, nobody is guiding you through it. You're all alone with your thoughts, questions, and the silence that used to be filled by God's voice in prayer. And while losing your sense of self, you lose your fellowship and community with those you thought would love you no matter what changing beliefs you may have. But here's what I still held on to even after my crisis of faith. In John Vervaeke's words, I never lost that taste for the transcendent. I never stopped seeking meaning and communion with others. If anything, these yearnings only intensified after I was washed clean of dogma. Deconstruction for me wasn't the death of my spirituality, but rather, it was the rebirth of it. It's like I became a born-again Christian again, but this time, it was my spirit that was renewed and born again. The rigid structures of my faith had to decay, so that something more organic could grow from it. And to anyone else wandering in the abyss today, listening to this seeking a way to taste the transcendent again, but without dogma, then I hope you'll continue listening to the podcast, because that is my aim and hope for this channel, to inspire and guide those aimlessly journeying through the void and help them be able to grasp onto something real. Because truth does not fear doubts or investigation. If something is real, it is worth pursuing no matter the cost. If there's anything that Christianity taught me, it was that. So, thank you once again for listening to the Philos-Hippie Podcast. I hope my deconstruction journey resonated with you and gave you the courage to be a truth seeker in your own life. And if you want to continue to learn and figure out how we can build up our spirituality again after deconstructing from institutional religion, then subscribe to the podcast and come back every Friday for new episodes of the Philos-Hippie Podcast. Until next time, I wish you all boundless wisdom and metta. Peace.